What we've been talking about is confusion. And we've kind of been setting the stage as though the older generation has answers, and then God always has answers through the new generation that's emerging to answer the confusion that's in the world today. And that's what we've been looking at in Psalm 71. All of you know Paul and Jake. And Paul, I wanted to ask the question because he saw something emerging in the church and called me one day and basically asked, I want to start the door. And Paul, I just want to ask you the question, what did you see with your generation that was coming up in the church that the door was going to be more of an answer than what, quote, we the church were providing for at that time?
There's probably two things. And the first was I didn't see it, but I responded to what somebody else saw. And so after a great Wednesday night of doing youth ministry, and I think at that point I had did youth ministry for 15 years and loved youth ministry and never really thought I would move out of youth ministry. We had a fantastic service, and after having that great service, we were celebrating, and a young adult who was an intern at the time, who's Nate Ralston, who's now on staff with us, he walked out of there and said, tonight was terrible. And I looked at him and I said, why was tonight terrible? And he said, because my generation serves this generation, but my generation is dying. And the church seems to always provide things for high school students, but the largest gap in the church was and is 20-somethings, which takes me to the second point, which is when I see gaps in the church, it makes me rise up to say, we got to do something about that. And so we started the door simply because there was nothing going on for people in the 20-something generation.
Now, let me ask you this question to follow up. What have you seen from the door population actually now, because we have provided that affects the world? Do you see that generation going out in ways that answers?
Because what you have on the high school level side is for many high schoolers, they show up because their parents show up. And now all of a sudden you provide a service that wasn't there before, and you have a whole group of people who want to serve and follow and love God.
Yeah.
But there is nothing that the church is offering for them in the way that they do it. It's not the doors aren't open for them, but everybody has a generational response to God. And so when we opened the doors for them, it grew. It gave them a place to serve and worship God in a way that they feel comfortable doing. And now, Dan, we send dozens of kids off every year to missions.
So it kind of became a catalyst for answer to part of the world's confusion that's going on because of that service that was provided.
Yeah, because before there was a void. And now that void is being filled because we're giving young people an opportunity to love and serve God in a style that they love.
Yeah. Let me turn to Jake. Jake, I know that at some point last year you just said what we were doing was not capturing the youth in our own church, and so that's why we started the deepening.
Right.
And from what I understand, you're running over 300 kids on a weekend now. Tell me what was going through your process or your thought process at that time as to why we needed to make that shift to reach your generation.
Right. I think it's a good question. One of the things I always ask myself in youth ministry is, how come I didn't like youth ministry when I was a teenager? And it's because I didn't relate. I didn't relate to the things that we did as a group. It just didn't have an impact in my life that way. If you watch teenagers, the great thing about them is they're very honest with their body language. And so they will tell you if they're enjoying your service or not. And you could look around in the auditorium and you could tell if people were engaged in the service or not. And I think young people automatically, and probably not even young people, but everybody, they make a decision as soon as they walk into a place if they're going to engage or not. And it seems like they either turn a switch and shut off or they jump in. And so what we realized was that we needed to create an environment where they went, I want to be a part of this. Where they would walk in and go, I want to have church. And we've just seen something happen there. They respond to the worship, that is their style. They respond to the message, that is their message. One of the things that I love is we had a group of, they're called Emo Kids now. You have goth, you have all these different, and it's the crazy hairstyles and the weird makeup, and these guys could care less about the church. They could care less about, being a part of it. And yet they showed up, and one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to do a benefit concert for the invisible children. Mm-hmm. They had this need and this desire to serve others. Yeah. Something that God had put in them that they were responding to, and the church wasn't responding to it, so they were going to do it themselves. Yeah. And I love that. And that's one of the things that made me go, you know what? We're missing our guys here. Yeah. And one of the things that I really appreciate about them is they never ever get hung up on, this is the way we've always done it. Yeah. Right. They never get hung up on that.
Yeah. So, it goes back to the idea that an emerging generation sees the world in a different context than an older, and then they can apply their answers to world. And so it gives us hope. It gives us hope that, God has answers in the new generation that's coming up that answers some of the confusion in the world today. Yeah. Paul, you were going to say something?
Well, I think that it comes back to the fact that God places the desire in people that they would seek Him. And every generation seeks Him differently because they're seeking Him out of their own desires. And when we try and say, this is the way the church operates, this is the way the church works, and you've got to find God in this realm, we put God in a box. Yeah. And God, you can't put God in a box.
He's bigger than that, isn't He?
He's bigger than that.
I want to thank both of you for this.
Thank you,
Dan. It really does say to the world that God does have answers in generations. And so thank you for all you've done.